Hi everybody, Matt Bernier, Dan Illman taking a look back at the Grade 3 Oklahoma Derby from Sunday at Remington Park. We had a pretty heavy favorite in this spot in Battle of Midway, shipping in for Jerry Hollendorfer from the West Coast as they break from the gate. This is a horse that, boy, you see those Don Alberto silks that we're familiar with in the orange and green. He doesn't have the cleanest trip early on.
This first quarter mile is just brutal for Battle of Midway, brutal for Flavien Prat. He wants to be forward. There's no pace whatsoever, and he is just going to be jostled in and among horses. He is fortunate that B Squared, eventually the number 2, who is just in behind as well, pulling, eager, is going to get to the outside and eventually push this pace. But this is a horse that's just been jostled throughout in a very uncomfortable spot. And Flavian's like, I got to take him back.
Yeah, got to take him back to mid-pack, which, okay, he came from off the pace last time, but it's probably a little bit farther off than they would ideally like. Down on the inside toward the front, you have Untrapped making his first start in a number of months. And all of a sudden, we've got a 3-ply duel, 4-ply duel almost up the backside.
Ricardo Santana knows that Untrapped's sort of reputation is 1 1/8 might be a little bit too far. So he is very pleased to see that the lit-up number 2, B Squared, is going to go out there now and push Gato Del Oro on the lead. It allows Untrapped to get in behind horses and relax a little bit. And for a brief instant, it looks like he's going to be completely bottled up on the turn, but he eventually saves for one run, which I think was the plan.
Meanwhile, keep an eye on the orange and green silks right there. You've got Battle of Midway. He's going to commence his rally and his run on the outside, now going 3-4 path between horses. And for a minute, it looks like he's home free, but take a look at Untrapped. He's loaded in behind runners.
He is loaded in behind runners, and again, I think the plan is we don't want to produce him until too late because he only has a short burst, and 1 1/8 is too far. Yes, the first 2.5 furlongs were uncomfortable for Battle of Midway, but listen, he's probably supposed to win in this situation. He's made the front. There's perhaps a distance challenged horse on the outside. Battle of Midway doesn't seal it.
You know, I'll tell you what, for a horse that we all had questions about how far he wanted, Untrapped is finishing. He is finishing this race. It's not as though it's a stagger fest at the end. A big punch of the air from Ricardo Santana. They get the job done. Winning the Oklahoma Derby, pays $24.60. Battle of Midway, your 7-5 favorite, runs second, pays $2.80 to place. Gato Del Oro also coming in from California, $3.60 to show, $2 exact, and $90.20. 50-cent try, $159.25. Untrapped earns a 94 buyer speed figure and a 121 time form US rating for Steve Asmussen. Again, Ricardo Santana with a really, really tricky ride there. It's only his second victory to date thus far.
And he's sticking his tongue out at me right now because all those times that I followed Untrapped, whether it was the Indiana Derby, the Ohio Derby, I believe it was, where I was like, he could do it. He could do it against these kind of fields around 2 turns, and he would just come up short or flatten out a little bit in the stretch. And you and Mike Beer, our colleague, would say, he just needs a turn back. He just needs a turn back. And I finally bought it, and Untrapped didn't buy it, though.
You got burned, and that's the thing. Now the interesting thing, I personally still believe he's better going shorter, but at the same time, when I look at the way that he finished, I said, boy, all of a sudden, that looks like a horse that can get 9. Is it a situation of maybe he just needed a few months?
Maybe he just needed a few months to grow into his own, and a very smart trainer, and Steve Asmussen always kept the faith. Listen, he heard the whispers that this horse needed shorter distances, but he took chances in the secondary derbies at big pots, knowing this is where the money is, and this horse is good enough to get at least some of the money. I think they just needed to tinker with the running style a little bit. Santana, again, very pleased when B Squared ran up there and really pushed that second quarter mile. That allowed Untrapped to relax in behind horses. But let's give Untrapped some credit. He was 3 lengths in arrears turning into the stretch to the favorite, and he ran him down on the square and was going away.
Battle of Midway is going to be a fascinating horse to decide what you think coming out of this race, because a lot of people are going to look at it and say major disappointment, because you're still supposed to go on even with that trouble early. You're going to have another group and another camp, myself included, saying, considering the early issues, I don't know that I want to be that hard on him, and I also don't know that he wants 1 1/8.
Well, what's the majority view going to be? Because I want to be on the opposite end to maybe get my price, or maybe not, or to try to beat him at a shortish price. Something tells me people are going to say, well, he got beat by that trouble going into the first turn where he was bounced around. He never really could get the position he wants. I'm going to be in the camp that a good horse overcomes that he made the lead in the stretch. He had no excuses after that. When that pace quickened up the second quarter, you saw Battle of Midway, he was all by himself. He was able to relax into a rhythm. He split horses. He took the lead at will, and he couldn't hold off Untrapped. I thought it was a good effort, but not a kind of effort where I'm like, boy, I can't wait to bet Battle of Midway next time.
Gato Del Oro, this is another race. It seems like he hasn't quite taken the next step forward for Richard Baltas. Colonel's Dark Temper, it seems like he's probably just a notch or 2 below. The major disappointment of the race was Gervin.
I guess that was the major disappointment of the race, right? I think some folks were a little confused as to why he was here. Maybe he didn't run so great up at Saratoga, and Joe Sharp, I know the connections wanted to run him down here, sort of the local folks, but they had the Pennsylvania Derby. No one would have faulted Joe Sharp for running Gervin in the Pennsylvania Derby. He would have taken some money in here. I don't know, he just didn't really fire at the end. Maybe that slow first quarter mile took him a little bit out of his game. He was a little bit far back, but I'm interested in your thoughts on Gervin. You know, what happened?
Well, the problem is this is 2 consecutive efforts for a horse that really, and this was the thing that I at least liked about him, that with the exception of the Kentucky Derby, you were going to get an honest effort.
Right.
It may not be good enough to win, but you were going to get an effort out of him. This is 2 in a row where he really never picked his feet up. I hate to say maybe it's time to give him a little bit of a break and say, give him a freshening, we'll bring him back as a 4-year-old, but at this point, I don't think you can go on to a race like the Breeders' Cup, even though he won the Haskell, which is a win and you're in for the Classic.
He doesn't, owe his connections anything.
No.
He's done some great work, certainly in the spring. When he just ran the table at the fairgrounds, he ran in the Derby, kind of a wettish track. He caught, he had some foot problems leading up to it, and then he even rebounded there and had such a nice summer. I mean, you're right. It might be just, it's been a long campaign for Gervin. Let's give him a break. Let's regroup. Let's bring him back to the fairgrounds at 4 where there's some rich purses.
McCormick, we've talked about. He's been a little bit disappointing for me anyway at this point because it looks like he could have been anything. The real horse that I just want to touch on one more time is B Squared. I don't know that I want to hold this race against B Squared.
Mario couldn't hold him.
Yeah.
He broke really well. I think if Mario had to do it again, he just would have sent him on with there and tried to set the pace. And he was sort of bounced around with battling midway going into the first turn. Once he got to the clear, he was lit up. And the next thing you know, he's battling with Gato del Oro. I think 1 1/8 A is a little bit far
Agreed.
for him to begin with. They've been testing him, Doug O'Neill. I like that about him. I think it's time now to back him up in distance, back him up in class, because he's okay.
Steve Asmussen is one of the best trainers we've ever seen as far as horse racing is concerned. And guess what? He was adamant. This horse can get 1 1/8 on a big stage, integrated stakes race. Untrapped gets the job done and rewards Asmussen and company. 94 buyer winning the Oklahoma Derby.